Oh, I prefer my meals uncooked. And how many times have I told you about using garlic?
Yes, Master. Forgive me, Master. Please.
Bite into Paradelphia. Thursday nights at 8, only on Toxic Radio.
Paradelphia. Because what if it's all true?
While you're rocking with us at Toxic Radio, don't forget to check us out on social media.
I want details, and I want them right now.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Now you're talking, brother.
Chat with us, keep up on news. Just don't make it weird. Don't be a stalker. Don't be that guy.
You just want to suck the joy out of everything.
Toxic Radio. Get infected. All sports talk shows are the same, right?
I am bothered by everything.
You gotta go back to football school.
The goal on this guy, it's just immeasurable.
Wrong. In a world filled with talking heads more interested in their own celebrity than actually knowing the sports world, it's hard to find the people who really care about sports first. Look no further. Wire to Wire has it all covered. These guys have the knowledge and the cred to back up their opinions. No hot takes to get attention, just straight up opinions. Know anyone else who correctly called the 2020 World Series and March Madness? How about 70% on the NFL and NCAA football last year? You don't. Bottom line, these guys know their shit. They aren't doing it for attention, they're doing it for passion. Wire to Wire, live every Wednesday, 8:30 Eastern, only on Toxic Radio and wherever you find podcasts.
Hungry for Hope Nation, your host here, Donnie Hart, live from Toxic Radio Studio. We got a great show of Hungry for Hope tonight. I am joined by my guest co-host, Janine Kirby. Janine?
Hey, everybody in Hungry for Hope Nation. Glad to be here again. Thanks.
It's always a pleasure to have you, Janine. You know, I love you, everybody at Mind Your Brain Foundation, Candace. It's always great having you. So thank you for being here. And
yeah,
do you want to introduce our guest? I'll let you do the honors.
Sure. Tonight we're going to talk with a published author, survivor, and recovering alcoholic, Jeff Gould. Jeff wrote the book A Life Concussed, which talks about, there you go, Donnie's showing it right there, which talks about how he came back from addiction, homelessness, and brain trauma. And now Jeff does amazing work with giving back to our community, both in addiction, substance abuse disorder, as well as TBI, which you and I, Donnie, know a lot about. Jeff has just got a great thing going, helping to bring these two things together to help us all figure out how we can just live a decent life and understand our brain, addiction, and ourselves. I'm so glad to have met Jeff, and I'm anxious for him to share about all the great things he's doing.
Jeff, that was the best introduction we ever had. I think I just got fired.
It was a nice tee up, wasn't it? I mean, my heart just kind of warmed up, and I felt good. Thank you, Janine. I adore Janine Kirby. I think I also happen to I mention your story more often than you think I do, especially when trying to transmit things like hope. When people whose circumstances are far more fortunate than your own are going to do it, I'm like, yeah, you can. So, and I cite the case study of the lovely and one and only Mrs. Janine Kirby, and be like, you know, so I kind of tell you,
Thank you.
Many years ago, I had my hand cut off in a car accident, in a rollover crash. I mean, messy accident. And I was with in PT for about a year, and there was this this woman was just like a power driver, and you guys, she was so mean, but she had a way of like finding that gumption and pulling it out of you. So me and this other guy, we were kind of OG. He had about 8 pins in his arm. He had gotten like his arm crushed by 1,000 tons of concrete or whatever, or a significant amount of weight. And I had my whole hand sewn back on. And we would see these guys that were new to the clinic that had like their pinky like half cut off, and they would be doing their little rubber band exercises, and they would be sobbing at their little workstation. And she would say, "You're acting like a little," and she would say the B word, and she would be like, "He got his hand cut off, and if he can do it, you can do it." So Janine, if she can do it, anybody can do it, right? Anybody can get well. So.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate that. You just made my night. Thank you. I can't do it alone, man. We're only as strong as the people holding us up. No. That's for sure.
Correct.
Janine, actually, I met Jeff through Janine. She's been recommending you. She actually gave me your book when she first came to the studio a long time ago, months ago. And when I first talked to Jeff, that's like the first thing he said, like how amazing. I already knew how amazing Janine was, but when somebody else kind of mentions it too, and we talked about it for a brief second, you kind of really realize how amazing Janine is and how awesome you are, Janine. So definitely want to thank you. Like Jeff said, you're awesome.
Thank you so much.
It's great how these people I met through the show, even through the Mind Your Brain Foundation, Hungry for Hope. We kind of connect. It's like a new family I have, and I've learned so much from amazing people. And I'm so hyped for our viewers to learn from you, Jeff, man, to share your story. I'm sure there's so many people out there who can relate to some of your wild story, man. So let's give you the spotlight, man. Let's hear about Jeff Gould.
Well, I tell you what, Donnie, why don't you prompt me if you want to tee me up with some questions? I would love to, and we're getting ready to jump into it here. What do you want to hear about? Because I'm a talker and I can talk way too long, but where would you like me to start? And I'll just kind of go from there.
So Jeff, you're a head injury survivor. A lot of the stuff you have done, I was actually talking to Janine earlier, there's so much in my life that didn't make sense, and it started to make sense when I went back to when I was 17. Stuff that happened in my 20s up until recently that just didn't. I felt like there was a piece missing. People are like, "Oh, it might be addiction, might be this, mental health," and then like once I learned more about my head injury and really realized, I feel like over the last few years we really learned a lot. I really started to put pieces together. So tell us about, you had a head injury at a young age. Let's start there, Jeff.
I did, Donnie. So when I was 11, there's some people, you get to talking with them. I was just talking with a girl who's also in Philadelphia, as a matter of fact. And sometimes there's this effect called an accumulation of violations or something like that, where there's more than one. But I remember having two significant head injuries back to back. One, I had, you ever remember being a kid and you kind of dare yourself to do something stupid? You're like, "Hey, you dare me to jump off this roof or something?" Anyway, I had put my BMX bike up on a picnic table in a schoolyard, and I told my friend, "You dare me to jump?" He said, "Yeah." And once I got on the bike, on the table, I'm looking down and I'm like, "Man, there ain't a lot of runway here." You know what I'm saying? I'm not all that sure this was a good idea to begin with, but now I'm up on the table. I kind of committed to the thing. You know how we get. And so it's like, well, I guess I got to see this experiment through. And it went just as poorly as you can imagine, kind of ass over hat, head hits the ground. I remember that sharp crack. And those of you guys that have had a brain injury, that dull thud and everything starts swimming, and all of a sudden, like, your hands and feet get real cold, like that whole thing. And a friend's kind of bringing me back to consciousness. And hey, are you all right? Are you going to be all right? And yeah, I think so. And then all of a sudden the lights are a little bright, and the words and stuff are a little floaty on the page. I know now that's Erland syndrome. Actually wasn't the big one. About a year ago, same friend, interestingly enough, we were at his house, and to this day we've talked about it. We don't know why somebody took the door off the hinge, but as it was, the room we were in, the door had been taken off the hinge. It was just kind of leaned up against the wall, right? And so maybe I was on the ground, maybe reading a comic book, or just being a little kid laying on the ground, and somebody's elbow must have hit that door, but because it kind of wobbled, and then it just kind of came toppling down. And he told me, like, right at the last minute, he's like, "Jeff, look out." And I turned my head up to look, and the edge of that door caught me across the face. It was almost like being like slapped by a 4x4 with incredible velocity. And I mean, it was just maximum amount of damage. So it was an immediate trip to the surgeon and the orthodontist, and you would call maxillofacial surgery. The teeth of mine that were still left were definitely pointed in the wrong direction. They were kind of pointed west, when they should have been pointed south. And so they kind of wired my head back together and stitched my face back up and all that. There was some minor elements of plastic surgery in there, if I remember correctly. And it's funny what we remember and what we don't, because what I really know is the emotional problems that became kind of the ear markers of my life started almost immediately afterward. There was a very real sensation that I was like going to hell, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. There was dark and disturbing visions and recurring tormenting thoughts, recurring tormenting nightmares that almost from that time going forward just troubled me. And there's one piece of recovery literature on page 151. It says we were at the jumping off place and we would wish for the end. And I got to tell you, my starting point and my jumping off point were the same point. From the very beginning, I knew this is going to work out for me, and I was at the jumping off place. And yet I knew from the time I started just smoking pot, like I could not stop. I could not stop raging. I could not stop the crazy emotions. I could not stop the violent pictures and the things that were moving around inside my head. And so, sometimes when I think about alcoholism, here's how I would describe alcoholism. Isn't so much an alcohol problem as it is an alcohol solution, right? I'm this kind of amalgamation of uncomfortable thoughts and feelings for which drinking becomes a very real solution, makes me feel better, sorts all that out. I mean, in the beginning, it's a problem for you. I get that. I've been pulled into the principal's office. Hey, we think that you have a drinking problem. Well, it's a problem for you. That's why we're standing here talking. But I didn't have the witheritude to tell him, like, dude, I feel fine, right? Between drinks 3 and 13 or with pills, like I'm okay. And so I had this, I think of alcoholism as like an acute sensitivity to what I think other people are thinking about me, coupled with this alcohol solution in left field. And in the right field, I had, just blisteringly bad ocular motor dysfunction, what I know is today, horrific memory problems, massive amount of fog, almost a complete failure of the prefrontal cortex to be able to sort out problems. And I had these dark and scary visions, left temporal lobe stuff. And so you mix those two things together, and as if you could hope or expect that I was ever going to, join the Navy and be okay, or go into the Peace Corps, do any of the things that normal people seem to do. And so even though my dad's West Point and his dad's Point and my family is academia in every sense of the word, I almost just feel like I was dutifully bound to end up on the street from the time I was 12. I was just a lot to handle. So
Yeah, you brought up the point how once you get that first head injury, and then all the hits you take after, that's like something I didn't really even understand until more recently. A lot of even when I went to the Mind Your Brain Foundation conference they're having March 26th. They have it every year. They're doing it through Penn Medicine. And I went there and I heard some of the speakers, and I was like, man, I had this head injury at 17, and then I went on to have so many concussions. I played college football, semi-pro football, arena, professional wrestling, and all of them came with a couple concussions. And it's just, I'm sure at that young age, even when you got in that bike accident, you didn't know all the hits you probably took to your head after that young age. I'd assume you took a few more too.
Well, and there's something about when we think of concussion anymore, and you hit it on the head, not to even make a pun here, but Donnie, we always think about kind of the sports related, right? Like there's a precipitating event in sports, and then we kind of think of the after effect, and some would call it like self-medicating and things like that. But you got to understand too, and this is a lot of the people I see. I mean, for the real alcoholic, there is a rough and tumble lifestyle that goes along with just accommodating that in your life. I mean, if you're worth your weight in salt as an alcoholic, oh, you've fallen down a few flights of stairs. Oh, you've fallen off a ladder. You've hit your head on your windshield. You've wiped out the motorbike in the back alley, and probably had so many drinks in you, you just stood up and told everybody, I'm fine, right? And the truth is, and it was an accumulation of violations. And then somebody like that scanned at like the Amen Clinic, Respect, and you look at these scans and it's like people are remarkably damaged, and they've kind of created their own neural pathways and workarounds as they've gone, but they're not the same dude that they were started out. It's actually, to me anymore, because it's the world I work in, it's the most common thing in the world. So
Yeah, I'm sure now, you've been in this, you had your head injury, but you've been even in the recovery and all this for going on what, like 19 years, correct?
19 years, yeah. November 22nd would have been 19 years.
So, you had these head injuries, then, through your book, A Life Concussed, you talk about, do you feel like your head injury led to, you ended up, you had an addiction problem, you ended up homelessness, all this stuff you mentioned in your book. Did a lot of that, you feel like the root cause could have been, this trauma to your head?
I do think so, and let me tell you why. My dad liked the alcohol, right? He was one of the vice presidents for a large nuclear weapons firm who probably, because of his sheer brilliance and ingenuity, probably would have been a penchant, but he had, he would get some liquor in him and he would say the wrong stuff. Probably would have been at the head of my grandfather, if I'm to believe my father, and I do. My grandfather was one of the chief strategists in Bay of Pigs, was one of the founding members of the CIA, really before they had a name from it, and one of the first Japanese prisoners of war taken. If you believe the story I'm told, after the Bay of Pigs, we're going back significantly here, he was reported to have taken some drinks, and he called John F. Kennedy a fool repeatedly after he'd been drinking, and then was politely asked to resign from his post with honors and all that, of course. And so I come from, it's not that I don't come from people that don't drink. Oh man, they drink, but they seem to drink their way through their PhD and doctorate program and things like that. That's kind of what my family's done. That's what they've always done. And yet I couldn't even make it through a community college. So I think there's a place in the book where I kind of talk about sometimes when there's been an auto accident and the insurance adjusters show up and this vehicle spun around and it's over here and this one smashed it, telephone poles knocked over, and sometimes the insurance adjuster will come out and they'll be like, well, it's 20% rain, right? And it's 20%, slick roads, and then the fault or causality is 30% of this guy took the corner too fast, and that's kind of how they make payment, right? They assign causality, it's like that. So to the degree that was the cause that put me on the street, I don't know. I've really thought about that. And I feel like without the head injury, I certainly would have been alcoholic, no doubt. I just think that was kind of in my genealogy to be alcoholic. But I don't think it would have looked like that. I don't think it would have looked like Skid Row, LA, or Van Buren Street in Phoenix, or some of these just these horrific I was. And so, yeah, I just, and Janine and I, we participate in these TBI communities, and sometimes people with the real big heavy duty ABI stuff, sometimes they wear it as like I'm like, well, I had to learn how to tie my shoes and swallow again, and I was in a coma for 3.5 months, and as if wanting to sort of shrug for compare and contrast or whatever. And it's like, you know what? I didn't have to learn how to swallow again. I didn't have to learn how to tie my shoes. Externally, my motor skills weren't so much that you would know if you walked by me like something's really wrong with that dude. And yet, in the long enough arc that we think of as a lifetime or half a lifetime, my TBI was enough to ruin my life and put me on the street. So I don't know what, we talk about concussion, and sometimes we think of things as it's almost like TBI light, right? I don't know that there is such a thing as TBI light. 2 months pregnant and 8 months pregnant, pregnant is pregnant, right? Whether it's 2 months or 8 months. And brain injury is brain injury. You can't discount and say, I sometimes tell people I think the difference between, 94% executive level functioning and 96 or 97% is kind of the difference between going to college and living under a bridge, maybe. There's a lot in that 3%. And so sometimes all you got to do is just knock out a little bit of that programming, and in a long enough arc called life and dreams and hopes and what people are supposed to have, once those things start to diminish, we don't end up in good places without help, for sure. So
Yeah. Janine, you there? You're listening to all this. You can relate so much to his story. What do you have to say, Janine? I want to hear from Kirby.
I really loved the insurance analogy, Jeff. That's a perfect analogy with, what percentage is my forlorn addiction that was already set. What percentage is my brain injury? I had my major injury that left me permanently brain damaged in 2012, but for the whole of my life, I was a boxer when I was younger. And yes, as an athlete, I went back in to the fight. I retired at 14-2, but
nice.
And I played sports. I played soccer. I know that I had a lot of concussions, some that were treated, some that were not, over the course of my life. So it didn't just come down to the accident I had in 2012. So the stuff that I've learned over the last 10 years, gosh, it'll be 10 years this December, and talking with people like yourself who are in the recovery community with a brain injury as well, it's easier to make sense. And me and Donnie were talking about it. We've talked about it a couple times, not to use my brain injury as an excuse, but that it certainly helps me to be a lot easier on myself and with my higher power to move forward in this lifetime and be able to connect the dots and work around all these things. And that's what I really like, and why we hit it off, I think, Jeff, right away, is it's about looking forward, understanding what's behind. And you're very knowledgeable. You're a complete brain geek, and I love that about you because I'm a brain geek too. And you really jumped into learning about your injury. So I really just love the way you use that analogy. And yeah, it's good stuff, man. You're talking good stuff. How, tell us about how you still have any effects in your day-to-day life, and I want to hear about how you're using your experiences to help our
Um,
community, both.
a number when we talk about validation, and you had mentioned validation, I want to say in some of our behavioral health models and recovery models, if you work or even have been around at all in treatment, there's this very focal point called trauma-informed care, which we know, and I'm not even talking about head trauma, I'm just talking about trauma in general. And if there's a wonderful book, The Body Keeps the Score, about, and it basically talks about how on a molecular level, sometimes we kind of store shared life experience that, and things that they failed to process in real time. And so we kind of stick it somewhere in our lower back or in our shoulders, and it can cause you an awful lot of grief and distress. Well, one of the things I noticed, and is this is about moving forward, because sometimes I see the results of trauma work, but if all we get through forming a therapeutic alliance is a validated victimization of how hard we have it, and I mean, here's the truth, that's not freedom to me, right? And I've known people that are in this kind of culture of therapy that will say, like, well, you need to understand that my bad, and I'm not going to stand for these microaggressions. And they almost act as if life was supposed to wrap them in soft pillows and blankets and just kind of
Mhm.
cut them a break. Now, to be fair, nobody needs to be mistreated or be trampled upon. I mean, I'm with that. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that. But there also there's this special kind of identity around victimology is not something I don't think is, certainly wouldn't have served me and isn't going to serve anybody well. Like this whole idea of about hope is like, we got to get on with it. We get one kick at this can at this thing called life, and you got to do the best that you can. So going into that, I'm a huge advocate. There's a little kind of a lot of cities have these. There's a clubhouse right up the street from me, called BIND. It's a brain injury network of Dallas, as it turns out, and they have a lot of these in different cities where they do art and they do music, and it's almost like the equivalent of like an Alano club, but for people that have brain injuries. And there's so many nonprofits around the country that have different kinds of programs and day programs for people that are very much lower functioning on the scale. And I like to spend time talking with people and interacting with people and seeing how we can make improvements on those programs. And then, it's never a bad thing to be, you always want to position yourself to be somebody else's answer. I just shared with somebody last week. When I got sober with some real, like, heavy duty rock and roll. These guys were rock and roll to the bone, right? And everybody smoked leather jacket. They didn't smoke leather jackets. They wore leather jackets and smoked cigarettes, and did drugs and drank and listened to Black Flag or whatever they did. And but I was so, through kind of making some amends and doing some 12-step work in that community and kind of regaining some credibility that had really been lost with some of these people. And this was just on a very basic recovery level, that as a result, it was this way for years. When there was some band that was on tour, right? And their bass player would kind of go MIA and just start smoking crack, and they would tell people back home, oh my God, like, he ruined the rest of the tour. We had to cancel the whole tour and come back, and we don't know what we're going to do with this. We kick him out? Do we beat him up? Do we cancel our recording contract? What are we going to do? And a long time, people would be like, you should probably call Jeff Gould. He'll know what to do. He'll know what to say. And that was a result of my recovery demonstrating something to them that seemed credible to them. And so now I kind of like to try and position myself with that, because let's here's something to really talk about. Western medicine doesn't have a lot of answers for people. Let me take that back. Janine, Western medicine, you had the best and brightest, but you also happen to be a miracle, and you have to know that, right? But for a lot of us, Western medicine and just the basics of pharmacology, which is pills, and cranial surgeries, and even the working images we work with to adequately present, are largely inadequate, especially for well, lots of TBIs. I mean, most of our CT scans and most of our MRI scans, they're calibrated to look for one thing and one thing only. Do you have a vascular bleed? If you've had a head injury, they want to know, have you had a stroke? Because it's going to kill you. So they stick you in a tube and they take a picture, but they're just looking for the splotchy part of that picture that tells us, yes, you've had a stroke and we need to intervene on this. And if it doesn't, what often happens is they're like, you're free to go. You're well, you can go home. And they're not working with other fMRI or SPECT or more sensitive cameras to be like, well, hold on a second. You ain't the same dude that you were the day before you walk here. And you're going to have some long-term, some serious challenges intellectually, brain fog, memory problems, emotional problems, these kinds of things. And we're really not even setting, I mean, from the emergency room on, our diagnostic criteria for looking at TBI has deficits. We'll say it that way. So,
Jeff, you bring up me and Janine we've been talking about this all week because I was going through some stuff and I had to look up some of my medical records. I got my injury, my serious head injury was when I was 17 years old, 2005. So a lot of these medical records I haven't looked over. I haven't, really seen in a long time. And I started going through them the last week or two, and it was just it's exactly what you're saying. I was 17 years old. I had broken just about every bone in my face. My leg was barely still hanging on. I broke over 16 bones, I think it was total. I should have been dead. I crawled for 2 hours. It was a big time thing. And they're asking me, they're like, the patient confirmed that, I was given all the decisions. I was signing off on everything. And then they're like, I'm like, how can a 17-year-old who I was so out of it, they were just going, whatever I said, like, oh yeah, do you want this surgery? All right, do you not? Yeah. I had no idea what I was doing. And then when I left, after being in there weeks, it's like the discharge was just nuts. They're like, take all this, my jaw was wired shut. They just gave me a bunch of pain stuff. They never told me to go see psychiatrists, nothing with the head. There was just so little they did. And we've come a long way since 2005. But there were so many, me and Janine had mentioned, we're never looking for an excuse for our behavior, but there's so many answers that I had for so long that now have been answered through all the stuff I've learned about the head injuries and all the stuff I suffered. And if I knew this stuff back then, I think I could have saved myself some, I would have been a lot more protective of my head. But you're exactly right. Do you feel like now, though, we've come, I feel like even the last 5 years with all the CT stuff, with the NFL, do you feel like we've come a lot farther, Jeff?
Well, yes and no. Like if you happen to play for the Atlanta Falcons and you're knocked unconscious on the field, you better believe your care is going to be over the top, and they're going to be, especially now, I have a business partner with Hall of Fame Behavioral Health, and they're doing so much to accommodate, and it's almost like wraparound care with the National Hockey League. What they're trying to do is really avoid lawsuits, right? Let's kind of call it what, and that's not to say there isn't some care and concern there. But now let's talk about Joe Blow, who doesn't play for the NFL, in Topeka, Kansas, who falls off his bicycle. I mean, I'll give you a very recent history. A friend of mine, you know how sometimes a Facebook memory will share? This was a very good friend of mine, somebody I had coffee with often in Dallas, and he has a 5-year-old son. And on his Facebook, he shared a memory from the year before, so this is this would have been 2021, somewhere in there, of he and his little 5-year-old Sawyer had been kind of roughhousing, gigging each other, and they both took a tumble down the stairs. And Sawyer he sits up and his boy's crying, and he's got a lump the size of a lemon on the size of his head. And of course, he, as a good dad, he panics and picks him up and, buddy, stop crying. And oh my God, and get in the car and we got to go. And, and he's just, and you're going to be okay. And rubbing his little head and, kissing it, doing what concerned parents do. They get him there. I do believe they did scan him with a CT, and his kid comes out of the scan and they tell him, you're very lucky. Your son's going to be okay. And you did the right thing by bringing him here. And by the way, here's your, $600 copay hospital bill, and good luck. And so I was telling him, I was like, yeah, and then I asked him a question. I said, has your son's behavior changed in the last year? And he says, it's really weird that you mention that, because he's become really, really clingy in a way he wasn't before. And he's become really, really emotionally driven in a way that he wasn't before. And his challenges that he had seem so much greater. And I was like, yeah, bud, like that's kind of what I'm talking about. And so they went again, they did their due diligence, and they looked for, did your son have a vascular bleed, or was his skull actually cracked? Was there a fracture in the skull? And short of finding evidence of neither, they deducted that he was fine. And it was funny because the same guy, he had done a combat tour in Afghanistan, and he said, our field assessment was something like this. Is there blood coming out of the eye? Okay, there's a bomb goes off near the Jeep. Is there blood coming out of your eyes? Is there brain fluid coming out of your ears? Is your skull fractured in half? And are you throwing up in the Jeep, right? Not to be morbid. You remember that Monty Python skit where 'twas just a flesh wound and all that? I mean, do you know how ludicrous that is? Like, yeah, if your brain is coming out of your head, you probably had a brain injury of some sort, right? I mean, of course you have, right? Now, short of that, there's so much.
Of things. Yeah, it's not.
There's
It's a lot
so
more.
much that can go wrong neurologically that will show up on other images. It just won't show up on that particular CT scan. And so, and I think the other thing they probably do is check for level of consciousness. Do you know who the president is? Do you know what month it is? Do you know what city you live in? And if you can answer those questions, you're going to walk out of there with a clean bill of health, when the truth is you may be anything but. And so I'm a big advocate for pushing for better diagnostic instruments and treatment. That's the world I work in, and I just think we need to be asking the right questions, and kind of capturing these cases that have a lot more going as simply addiction. So that's kind of my zip code right now. But I think in general, push for just better diagnostic criteria, better. I honestly, I don't think the doctors we're talking about, it's not that they don't care, it's that they lack training and they haven't been taught these things. And as much as they know, there's just, they're not specialty, they're not neuropsychiatrists. So there's this whole field of information they don't know. And when they are looking to the scan, to them, the patient does look clear and they're like, free to go, so.
Yeah, you're free to go. I think I was saying the other day, basically, I could just speak on my experience. At 17 years old, they would have been better off giving me a loaded gun and just telling me to go shoot it everywhere. Because that's basically what they gave me. I had this brain injury, and then they just threw a bunch of painkillers at me, and they said, go, and I spent the next 10 years, bashing my head and all these sports and all this stuff with, I'm struggling with all this, and I feel like so many other people have gone through this experience. You see a lot of people who had head injuries, because a lot of them have come from accidents where there was pain involved and where they were given painkillers. And, I feel like the head injury and the addiction go hand in hand. I'm sure you guys can kind of agree. Yeah. Janine's case was a little
I was lucky,
different.
No, I was lucky enough to have a medical background, which is why I was curious to learn about what was happening. And I apologize, Donnie, for cutting you off, but I wanted to make my exit.
I was saying,
and I think with all the people I've spoken to over the years through the Mind Your Brain Foundation, talking with Donnie and people we know, that it's a lack of education and awareness that really affects all of us, um, and our recovery just emotionally as well, you know? Like, once I understood that this part of my brain they're taking out is going to affect me this way, it made it less frightening, as well as, you know, I actually was lucky enough in Philadelphia, we have some of the most amazing cutting edge doctors that are in the thick of this, you know. My neurosurgeon is one of the NFL's go-to neurologists. He's the ones up in the stands that calls down to people, says, no, no, get him off the field. And I have another neurologist that is part of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, which is where they do all the CTE research. I mean, and that's in Philadelphia. And to your point, Jeff, what about, you know, Joe Blow walking down the street who doesn't know any of these things or is too frightened to even ask? And yes, our doctors, again, I'm lucky to have these doctors in Philadelphia, but a lot of doctors don't want to touch the brain, quote unquote. You know, they just want to fix with medication. They want to fix with. They just want to fix you. And a brain is not a muscle. It's not a bone. You can't put pins in it, like you said, Jeff, with your with your hand. You can't sew it back on. You can't replace the missing part of my brain. You know, and I just
And the other thing you run into, and
really
not, you know, I
appreciate.
mean, not to
Janine,
be on a
not to cut you
political
off, Jeff. Janine, you got to get out of here. I know you had something at 7:40. I don't want to
I
keep
do.
you.
Yeah, Jeff, please enjoy the rest of your time. I'll be listening tomorrow. But thank you so much, and I hope to talk with you soon. And next
So
time
good
you're
to
in
see you.
Philly, cheesesteaks on me.
Absolutely.
Okay?
I wouldn't
All
think
right.
I wouldn't think of not catching up with you. Absolutely. So
Janine,
Love
thank
and
you so
respect to you.
much.
You too,
You're
Donnie.
amazing.
Love you. I'll be
Have a great
talking with
night.
you soon. All right. Bye, Hungry for Hope Nation.
Jeff, man, where were you? I didn't want to cut you off. I knew Janine had to get out of here.
Oh, I was just gonna say I had actually one of the founding, I would say founding fathers, except it was a woman, Dr. Peavy, who started working with biofeedback, working on, you know, regulation with patients in 1973, 74, who knows an awful lot about traumatic brain injury. But, you know, we were talking the other day and she was telling me about this idea of managed care. And so you have to remember the context or the box that most people are approaching head injury and everything else in is what is my Medicare or Medicaid going to pay for, right? And that means the other person on the other end of that is almost looking at a billing code or billing chart like, listen, you get 15 minutes and that's what you get. And the kinds of problems that we're talking about, um, the sad truth is insurance isn't going to pay to solve them, and those people aren't going to give you the extra time on their watch and be like, well, you know what, let's take the time. Sometimes I think the kinds of things we have, it's like untangling a giant ball of string. Like it seems so complex and there's so many pieces to it. And so one of the things I coach people through is this idea of self-advocacy. Like, you have to learn to be your own self-advocate, and I can show you exercises and teach you about functional medicine and integrative nutrition and different things that, you know, probably help the vestibular system and help memory. But we have to become our own advocates, because Western medicine, oftentimes either we can't afford it or it's not going to do it for us. And, you know, there's like, listen, I'll say this, I have no judgment about it. Some of these pages I go to, people are like, you know, hashtag bong hits cure TBI. And I'm like, look, here's the truth. Smoking anything, you're not doing your brain any favors, whether it's pot or tobacco. I've seen the end results of that on a scan. Now, if you want to talk about, I mean, eating, like, listen, if that's what's keeping you from, you know, from putting a bullet in your head, if that's what's making your life livable, like, by all means, don't let me, in my opinion, stop you. I genuinely want people to be well. I genuinely, to the core of my spirit, I don't want to see people needlessly suffer. But I know that that culture stems from Western medicine took it as far as it could take them. And they're like, well, if you're not going to help me, then I'm going to smoke a bag of pot every day and see if that helps. And for
Yeah.
some of them, it really does. So
You
who am I to judge it, right?
you even see these gamers now. Well, anybody, they take the CBD stuff too. You see that,
Right.
they take that to instead of drinking. Sometimes they say it's, you see all that stuff, but to each your own. I'm not a doctor,
Right.
but yeah, you see a lot more of that now with the edibles and all that stuff and them CBD gamer things. And
Right.
it's just, but you got 19 years sober. Am I right, Jeff?
19 years.
Going on
yeah.
19.
Mhm.
So you have all this knowledge, man. I've heard you've done so much. You're an advocate for all these people, but you learned so much in these last 19 years. What's one thing now that you wish young Jeff knew, 20 some years ago, 20 years ago, say?
You know what? I did this exercise, and listen, if there's anybody out there, like, do yourself a favor and do this exercise. I I wrote a letter to my 13-year-old self. Like, what would the man who I've become say to that 13-year-old kid that was just staring down the world with a barrel of problems? And I can almost tell you what it said. And there's a couple of, probably a couple of funny stories in there, but you know, uh, I'll give you some examples. When my eldest sister, who was going for an advanced degree in whatever paleontology, I think at the time, she had asked me if I would go. She's like, "Listen, I got to go down to South America and go camping for about 3 months and study stuff in the middle of the jungle. Do you want to come with me and haul the gear, and I'll get you paid, and we'll just hang out, just brother and sister, like out in the jungle, in the woods, messing with animals and stuff." And God is my witness, I really wanted to go, but I thought, well, I mean, do they have cocaine in the jungle? Where would I get that? And how am I going to get, and then what happens if I can't sleep? Or what if my sister's snoring? And just this anxiety kind of took over. And that thing stopped me dead in my tracks. There was a number of situations with some, I dated some pretty girls in high school, and I was just afraid to lay a finger on them. I was just afraid of them. I didn't know what to do, or all that stuff, and all that terminal virginity stuff that probably lasted maybe a year longer than it should have. And even 3, 4, 5 years later, there was a band called L7. This is the mid-90s. They were on Letterman, girl rock and roll band, full band, man. They were phenomenal.
You're gonna have our producers all pumped up, man. They're rock and roll. I'm looking over at Jamie and Mike. They're all pumped. Yeah.
So actually, I was talking to L7 one night, and they said, "Hey, jump on our tour bus." And I get on the tour bus, and they said, "Hey, man, why is your hand all bandaged up?" I said, "Because I had my hand cut off in a car accident." They said, "No, like, show it to us." So I took off the bandage, and they were like, "Holy heck, dude!" Like, and then we're all doing some drinking, and they're getting kind of flirty. They're getting ready to come on, and they're like, "Hey, come on the rest of our tour with us. We got 3 shows left. We're gonna finish off the tour in Los Angeles. We'll buy you a bus ticket home, and we'll send you home." And here's the truth, Donnie. Donnie, I had nothing going on. I wasn't working. I wasn't in school. I was living off my car accident money. I would go to PT once in a while. And they said that, and I just got so almost felt like I was going to throw up. I got so scared. I'm like, "Oh my God, these women are a big deal." And then I just started hemming and hawing, and, "Oh no, I need to get a haircut," or who knows what I said. And so anyway, so I wrote this letter when I was 30, and I told this 30-year-old kid, like, "Oh, like, enjoy those girls. Like, it'll be the opportunity of a lifetime. And go be out in the jungle with your sister. Screw your chicken shit little anxieties and these little things you suffer from. Like, go get out there in the world, man. And when you were in high school, go be with those pretty girls. I could take a chance on this stuff. Take a risk." And it was if I was speaking to that kid and knew he was still going to have problems. He was still going to go through some stuff. But it was like, but don't choke out the good things that were going to come your way, because there was a few of them between all that stuff. Sometimes even in the dark, magic can happen if you let it, and so like that. And one thing I say, so that's what I think looking back, one thing I say looking forward, and I strongly feel this way, to anybody, head injury or anything else, don't ever stop learning. There's so much to do and so much to be. And like I just, as an example, just took up fishing over COVID. It was like 2020, September 2020. I was like, I got to get out of the house, man. I can't be in here anymore. And I went up to, I was like, but what am I going to do? Go stand out on the lawn? I mean, really, right? And so I went up to, and you guys, listen, man, I'm a city boy through and through. I don't know nothing about horse, but I went up to Bass Pro Shops because I live in Texas and got myself a little, fishing rod and, a little tackle box. And I'm starting to sit out there on the lake. And it's just a beautiful way to start the day. You got the birds and the water.
It's crazy because that, I live on the water, but I'm on the water. I've gotten into fishing. I feel like the more I've been on this journey over the last couple of years, the more fishing has become part of my life. Like, I'm like, it's my thing, man. It's so peaceful just being on the water. I've been getting good at it too. I used to just throw it in. And now I'm getting good, but I didn't even care. I would sit out there for hours and didn't catch nothing. I don't know if I had the right bait. I'm putting Rice Krispie treats, hot dogs. I'm eating half the bait too. I'm eating that bait. I'll be honest. I'm like, put a little hot dog on for the fish. Put a little hot dog on for Donnie. But it's just funny that you say it. Like, there's something about being out there on the water. Sometimes I go by myself. Friends will like hit me up and want to come, and which is great too. But sometimes I just want to be out there by myself. Sometimes I go with a bunch of friends on a party boat. But it's just something about being on the water fishing, man.
And there's this like limitless reservoir knowledge to tap into, because here's the cool thing about fishing: there's no rules. There's no particular right or wrong way to do it.
Tell that to the game warden.
Well, yeah, true. There's a wrong way to do it. But when you start talking about, well, am I using braid or fluorocarbon or 10 pound or 12 pound or 30 pound, and what kinds of weights am I using, and what kind, those kinds of things, you just kind of learn through experience to get it dialed in. And so, but I say that because I tell people, like, don't ever stop learning, because especially if you have a brain injury, think of everything. What's a really good brain injury exercise is the word game. It's all over Facebook, super obnoxious, all over the place right now. Do you know how many different areas of the brain that hits on? About, well, 4 that if you could put somebody in a CAT scan while they were playing Wordle, everything would light up. I have a knockoff app on my phone, and I do about 10 of those puzzles a day. I'm learning to speak Italian, which is very linguistics, is a whole nother mental intervention. If you're talking to me, I'm a fish oil guy, and I eat fish 10 times a week and do cod liver oil and DHEA and all that stuff that kind of ties all that neurology together. Because I have such bad memory problems, I take Aricept. It's a medication they give to Alzheimer's patients. But I take it. So, we didn't touch on this, but I do want to share. Janine asked me, like, what's your TBI like? Here's the tough part about my TBI. You may have noticed this, Donnie. If you see some kind of dodgy eye movements, that is, well, now anymore it's habituated. At one time, that was very much, it's called ocular motor dysfunction, and it happens to people that have been hit in the head. And all those muscles that hold the eyes, that keep the eyes directed in place, and all the neurological cable that your vision's coming through, when those take a good shot, sometimes you get this kind of dodgy eye movement. So I had that eye movement my whole life, and then worse yet, the memory part that stores, particularly for me, faces and names are just the worst. And so it's interesting, right? Because you're talking about this memory deficit, and you're talking about this damage to the ocular motor system. But what it comes across in social graces is you're talking about another man who won't look you in the face, and you're talking about a guy that can't remember your name, and you talk about coming off as rude and inconsiderate in social graces and in professional circles. People don't know really how to read you. Although sometimes if they're telling the truth, they decide like, I really like that guy. Like I don't like the way he stares at the ceiling when he's talking to me. And I don't like that I've had to remind him 3 times of what my name is. And so, and I'll be honest, I don't like that. I don't want to put people off, man. I don't want to make somebody feel stepped on. So some of those things, some of those challenges I've faced, right? These are some of the things that we really don't talk about, but they're things I'm aware of. So anyway, I take a medication for Alzheimer's patients called Aricept, and it helps me remember people's names and faces and put those things together a little bit quicker. And so that's good. Again, I do a lot of DHEA and I do a lot of cognitive and linguistic stuff. And hand-eye coordination is a big one. Oh, I know what story I was going to say. I almost forgot. So we had this plumbing snafu one day, and I get beneath the sink and I'm like, man, I should probably just call a plumber. And then I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, no, don't call a plumber. This is like a giant 3-dimensional puzzle, and you got righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. You got no less than 6 valves, a garbage disposal. I'm like, think of this as a giant Rubik's Cube under your sink, and like, if you do it right, you saved $100, right? And so when I'm like, yeah, don't ever stop learning, don't ever stop growing. It's like looking at something like that and being like, no, I'm going to make myself figure out how to do this myself. Why? Because it's good for my brain. It's good for my cognitive health. It's making me think in 3-dimensional spaces. And as you're doing that, you're just carving all these little new neural pathways where that barren kind of, barren land was, where the injury is, where you can't even think straight anymore. And that's, when I'm doing my coaching, that's what I like to talk about, this is about doing an intervention on ourselves in essence, and trying to reclaim and figure out what our ceiling actually is and doing our best. So
Yeah, Jeff, you were just talking earlier about like how you wish you went to the jungle and stuff, and I just had to, while you're on that point, and a lot of the stuff you're talking about, I don't know if I share with you a little bit. My brother actually died. He was backpacking through the jungles and all over the world, and that was, his motto was mad to live. And I'm just gonna share, one of the last great mottos he lived by. He had a little poem. It said, go be that starving artist you're afraid to be. Open up that journal, get poetic, finally, volunteer, suck it up, travel. You were not born here to work and pay taxes. You were put here to be part of a vast organism, to explore and create. Stop putting it off. The world has too much to offer. That when 15 televisions and a TGI Fridays, you're not going to get that there. Take pictures, scare people, shake up the scene. That's Jimmy Hart. But I
love that. Did you have that written down, or did he text that to you? Because that's beautiful.
It's crazy. Like, the world just works. I believe more and more in something bigger than me over the years. Like, when I'm having a problem, I go on my brother's Facebook. The most amazing thing about Facebook, and you can search. So if I'm like going through something and I'm like looking for hope or wisdom, I type in words, and anything he's posted over, he passed away in 2014, but I almost feel like it was on his Facebook, but I looked it up because I was looking for something, and I searched his Facebook and I came across that. I feel like he made these things because he knew one day he might not be there and I might need to, look up stuff. And that was just one of the great things. I was going through like a tough day and I stumbled upon it. It was from 2009, but it was a post he made.
I really appreciate, there was a guy who was something of a mentor to me, and he had a saying that went something like this: always be on time, and I'm not talking about a clock. And he was talking about being plugged into the things around us in a way that there were things kind of natural. And to that point, there was someone very, very near and dear to me that had taken a picture and they had wrote, "Hi, Jeff," in big letters in the sand on a beach in Connecticut, and texted me the picture. Well, I never gotten that picture until after that person had passed. And much like yourself, Donnie, it was weird. It was almost like this, I don't know, like a little paranormal kiss on the cheek from the other side of somebody that's like, "Hey, Jeff," right? And I was like, "Oh, I so needed that visit today," right? Thank you for
Yeah.
stopping by. So I love that you shared that with me. I love stuff like
I love
that.
that story you shared, and a lot of people tune in. I even had some friends who lost some great people in their life recently. Anybody listening to this who's lost somebody, take it from Jeff, take it from me. I've learned, I was so angry in the beginning when my brother passed, and I'm sure you can relate to. But now I'm so thankful. Like every day, I'm like, man, I was the luckiest person in the world to get over 20 some years with such an amazing person. So instead of harping on, I know it's horrible. It's horrible going through that. But just try to take the good out of it. And Jeff, we only have a couple more minutes, and I just got to ask you a question before we do finish up. Man, all the stuff you're saying is amazing. I could talk to you forever. Janine Kirby was amazing. But our whole show's about giving hope to the hopeless. That was the basis of this, man. This idea of Hungry for Hope came from my darkest time. So I ask you, Jeff Gould, what does hope mean to you?
Boy, that's a question, isn't it? And I got an answer for you. I feel like it's there's a vitality and an essence to life that just centers in that. It's just kind of a small white light that we carry inside that lets us know every day is another chance. Every day something can change for better or worse, and so we may have talked about this on the phone when you asked me to do this, but back in not to get intellectual with it, because it wasn't an intellectual question, but I remember studying psychology in college, and if you all have ever seen a basic pyramid of human needs, it's like air, food, water, shelter, affection, something like that. But the person that wrote that pyramid of human needs, until you live without hope, you don't know that it comes right up there below air and right after water, because to live without it and not really think anything's ever going to get any better, not have any reason to think it, that is about, and it's a tough way to live. So I just think of it as that light and that vibrancy and that, in that sense. And I think this is here's what I want everybody to know. If you're going through a dark time, if I left Dallas tonight and started driving to Atlanta, no matter if I put my high beams or not, I'm never going to see Atlanta in front of me. The only thing I'm going to see with my high beams on is 40 feet in front of the car. But even on a dark night, the only thing you need to see is 40 feet in front of the car. And the hope and the faith is that if you keep moving forward, you'll get there, right? And so I think hope operates on the principle. The way people come back from brain injuries and addiction and everything else is on a daily basis. The lights only need to see 40 feet in front of the car. What do I do next? And it's the culmination of all those moments upon which powerful recoveries are built. So I love that car analogy. It's something very poetic and kind of juicy about that. So
Jeff, that was I asked that question a lot, man, and that's one of my favorite, most inspiring answers I ever got, man. That was amazing. I'm gonna get a highlight of that because people need to hear what you just said, man. What a way to end the show, Jeff. I just want to thank you for coming on. We're out of time. Anything you want to leave? We got a minute. Get out of here. Anything you want to leave? I just want to thank you. I want to tell people to check out your book, A Life Concussed, by Jeff Gould. It's on Google and everything. They can find it. I'm posted online. Anything you want to leave? We got 30 seconds.
No, that's it. Just everybody take care. Thanks for listening. Thanks for especially if you sat through the whole thing, and good to cut up with you tonight, Donnie. And thanks for having me on as a guest.
Thank you, man. Have a great night. Hungry for Hope Nation. We are out of here. See you next week.